What's up, y'all? We back with another video, and I want to talk about something a little bit different. It's not necessarily football related as far as X's and O's, but it's about a new coach. And I want to start here because Brian Flores is a name floating around all the league circles again as a hot head coaching candidate. And every single time that happens, the same cycle starts over. Teams start calling around. They start asking about what happened to Miami. And they start asking about how he is in the building, how he communicates, how demanding he is, how blunt he is. And to be clear, those questions aren't unfair because when you're hiring a head coach, you're not just hiring a play caller, you're hiring someone to set the temperature of the entire organization. But the more I sit with it, the more I can't help but feel like Brian Flores could, and I want to stress that word, could be exactly what this team needs, okay? And what really surprises me is the deeper that I thought about it, the more it stopped feeling like a risky swing and started feeling like, the something obvious that we should have just wanted. But before I even get into Flores, you have to rewind this because this conversation really doesn't actually start with him. It starts with the Raheem Morris hire, okay? And it sounds crazy, but that's where my mind went when I immediately saw what happened with Brian Flores and how he's going to be a new head coaching candidate. And when you revisit that decision, honestly, not emotionally, not defensively, just honestly, you do that, you take everything out, it still doesn't make sense of why we actually hired him. In fact, the more time that passes, the less sense it makes. And when you look at what Raheem did in LA before even coming back to Atlanta, the resume just doesn't justify the position he was given, okay? He was 15th in defense in 2021 with one of the most talented rosters in football on defense, okay? You had Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Greg Gaines, Taylor Rapp. You had a lot of different guys, Ernest Jones, Leonard Floyd, okay? And you were only 15th in defense? No, that's not very good, especially with the talent that they had. They were 22nd in 2022. I can kind of, pass that because a lot of guys got hurt off of the Super Bowl run. So, naturally things are going to regress. But then we went back up to 19th in 2023. And a lot of people give him that credit because, once again, a lot of guys got hurt and it was like just a lot of young guys out there playing. But the defense wasn't necessarily just great. Okay. And that's not really cherry picking. That's the full picture because that's 3 straight years of mediocrity at best with elite talent around him for the most part. And that's where the disconnect starts because if performance wasn't the driving force behind the hire, then what was? Was Atlanta desperate because the coaching cycle didn't break the way they wanted? Was it a familiarity hire? Was it rooted in comfort rather than results? Or was this more of an ownership decision than a football decision? And those aren't accusations. That is a legitimate question. Okay, all of them actually, right? Because when a hire doesn't feel rooted in excellence on the field, everything that follows just feels like justification instead of validation, right? You're constantly explaining why it could work instead of pointing out to why it has worked. And really that context matters because it sets up the backdrop for someone like Brian Flores even, before he even enters the picture, okay? And when you contrast the two, the difference is immediate. The first thing that jumps out with Flores is clarity. He has a very clear defensive identity, okay? Base 3-4 principles, multiple fronts, constant movement, players in a lot of different spots and playing in different positions, okay? An attack-oriented philosophy that's designed to dictate terms instead of reacting to what the offense does. He wants to stress those protections. He wants to make quarterbacks uncomfortable. He wants offenses guessing post snap, and there's no ambiguity in what he believes defensively. Okay, he just wants to get after you. He wants to make you feel him. And if that sounds familiar, because it really should, because that's exactly what the Atlanta defense has evolved to with Jeff Ulbrich as the play caller. Philosophically, they're not far apart at all. Both see defense as a weapon. Both believe in pressure that doesn't come from blitzing, but from uncertainty. They differ isn't really the aggression, it's the structure and the coverage menus, okay? Because Flores leans into more of the middle field open fire zones where you get the quarters pressures, the quarter, half, palms, half, quarter, all of that. While Atlanta has leaned more into the middle field close stuff. So think, man blitzes, sometimes cover 0, cover 3 with, 3 deep underneath fire zone. We talk about that a lot on the channel because that's the most, common blitz fire zone that you'll get, okay? And that distinction really matters because it's not a clash, it's an expansion, okay? It's the difference between having a narrow set of answers and having a broader menu you can pull from based on opponent, quarterback, and situation. And this is where the fit starts to feel real instead of theoretical because you're not asking Atlanta's defenders to become something that they aren't, okay? You're not asking them to learn football from scratch again. You're asking them to learn or really just do more what they already do with just more tools in the toolbox at their disposal. And that's rare coaching transitions because most of the time, new coaches come in and burn everything down because they want full ownership. And Flores doesn't need to do that here, okay? He could come in, keep Oberg, preserve the continuity, and still leave his fingerprints all over the defense. And that's not a weakness, that's confidence. And that's why this feels like more of a layup than people want to admit, because the personnel fits, the mentality fits, the structure fits. You're not, forcing square pegs into round holes. You're aligning pieces that already want to be aligned. But of course, every time Flores comes up, the conversation immediately shifts to the offense, and that's fair, okay? Because he's not an offensive coach. He's a defensive-minded guy, right? Defense can stabilize you, but your offense determines your ceiling, in my opinion, okay? And this is where I think Flores separates himself from, what we've already lived through. I don't think he makes the same mistake Raheem did. Flores strikes me as someone who understands his blind spots. He knows where he's not elite, and he knows what he's not trying to micromanage, okay? He's not trying to have an offensive brain, not trying to control everything as just to say he can. He's going to delegate that side of the ball to someone who actually has done the job before, okay? And that's where the names start to come up, in my opinion. Brian Daboll, Kevin Stefanski, if he becomes available, Mike McCarthy, even a John Gruden type as a wild card, okay? I just thought about that name. You don't have to like those names personally to understand what they represent, because they represent experience, and they also represent offenses that have been built, tested, broken, and then rebuilt, okay? They also represent quarterbacks who didn't just survive but developed, and that really matters because at this point, Atlanta doesn't need theory. They need proof of concept. And if Flores does decide to go younger at the coordinator position for offense, the only path that really makes sense to me is poaching the quarterback coach from Minnesota. And his name was already floating around league circles for an OC job anyway, okay? Which tells you that this really wouldn't be a reach. That would be continuation of a trajectory that's already in motion. And that's an important distinction because you're not hoping someone grows into that role like Zach Robinson. You were hoping he grew into it, but you're betting on someone the league already believed in. And then there's the Mike question, because people always are going to rush to that now after the injury. And, Flores is vocal. He doesn't sugarcoat things, and he doesn't hide how he feels. And if he doesn't want you, he's going to say that, okay? And that makes people uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable, honestly, because you just spent a first-round pick on him, right? And especially in today's league, you know how that goes, right? Because we're still talking about first-round picks after we just traded one, right? But naturally, people are going to wonder what that means for Mike, and this is how I see it, okay? Flores has no ties to him, and that is the true part, but I don't really think he punts on him because the raw ability is obvious. The arm talent is there. It's obvious. Everybody can see it, and what's missing isn't the talent. It's the refinement, the structure, and the consistency, okay? And whether you like Mike or not, whether Raheem stays or goes, Mike is going to be here, okay? That feels inevitable. And Flores strikes me as someone who would want to mold that clay, not just completely discard it, especially when the upside is still sitting right there. And that's what it really comes down to. It's not about guarantees. This isn't about timelines. This is about, insider information either. It's about alignment. When you line everything up, scheme, personnel, philosophy, timing, this doesn't feel far-fetched at all, okay? And Brian Flores wouldn't be a desperation hire. He would be a comfort hire either. He wouldn't be a nostalgic one like Raheem was. He'd be a direction hire. And for the first time in a while, that direction actually feels intentional rather than reactive. So hopefully with them bringing on Matt Ryan as a new, executive VP or whatever he is, because they say he's going to have a significant role in the front office, they need to listen to him, and he needs to say bring in Flores, because he will be exactly what we need in order to take that next step. Because as you can see, this coaching malpractice has people believing that this team really isn't good, and I just don't see that. This team is very good on paper, okay? The coaching just hasn't done itself a favor, right? Especially on offense. The defense has, but offense and special teams, it really just hasn't, okay? And hopefully he can fix that. But, it's December 29th, and the season isn't over yet. So we're just going to have to wait and see for both things, right? What kind of role Matt's going to have, and whether or not they actually fire him. Because if they fire Raheem, then this becomes a real thing. And if they don't, then, this was all for nothing. But it's very good to just sit there and look at the landscape and be like, oh, we could see this happen if we were to actually get a new coach, okay? Because there have already been rumblings around the league, okay, Raheem Morris might be gone regardless of the outcome of this year. We could win 4 straight and end the season off high. But, he's still going to go because it's just like, nah, bro. That midseason collapse was awful. Okay, but that's really all for me. If you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to like, subscribe for more. There's gonna be more coming at y'all this week, especially after the game. See you guys in the next video. Goodbye.